Hi, my name is Florian Thalhofer, and this is the Life According to Korsakow podcast. Today's podcast is from a talk I gave in Mexico City in October 2018. It was recorded shortly after I returned from the trip. I caught a bit of a cold in Mexico. You might hear it in my voice. I hope it is not too annoying. In Mexico, I was introduced as a media philosopher, and I have to say, I kind of like this job description. It helps me to explain also to myself what I am doing. This talk is about how we think, why we think the way we think, how and why thinking is currently changing, and how we will think in the future. The central element of my observations is the way we tell stories. The way we tell stories is at the center of what we can see, what we can become aware of. And the way we are telling stories is defining the way we are able to think. We are in the midst of a dramatic change of how stories are told. It has a lot to do not only with the various forms of media, but also with the development of the skills of how to use them. To learn how storytelling changes and why it is changing is allowing us to peek into the future. The future of thinking, the future of humankind. I hope that the following talk can be helpful for you to get a better understanding of the world. Enjoy. Imagine the life of a human being as a journey on a train. The whole trip takes a lifetime, from birth to death. What the passenger sees when he looks out of the window is reality. Imagine it as a wide landscape. If the train moves very, very slow, maybe just a couple of meters during the whole trip, the landscape that the passenger sees from the window does not change. Reality at the end of his life is still the same reality as it was when the passenger was born. For most of human history, the last 200,000 years, that was the experience of a human. Reality did not really change within the span of a lifetime. Reality changed, but it changed very, very slowly. Humans invented the wheel, stone tools, metal tools, all kind of tools, and these tools also changed humans. The way they thought, the way they approached the world around them. There were dramatic changes, but those changes were slow. Like 6,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers slowly settled and became farmers. But always, reality at the end of the life of a human pretty much looked the same as it did when the human was born. There was progress, but only visible over the lifespan of many, many generations. But within one generation, reality hardly changed. But the train slowly increased its speed. Maybe now the train travels for a couple of kilometers within a lifetime. And now you can see a change in the landscape of reality. In fact, at the end of human life now, the train has traveled so much that most of reality has changed compared to the reality when the passenger was born. We now live in an amazing period. Things around us change in a pace like never before. I remember when the first answering machine came up, and I discussed with my friends, what is this thing good for? I remember when the first teller machine was set up in a bank at the main square of the small town I grew up in. And I remember the discussions we had among friends. It might have been me who said, when I get cash from the bank, I want to talk to a human, not to a machine. I remember the time before digital. I remember the time before the internet. I have been in that time. Still, I can't imagine anymore how it worked, how you would navigate a city without Google Maps, I use Google Maps now when I go to the doctor in the city I have lived in for 25 years. How on earth do you find your way around in a city you have never been before? I remember I did just that. I remember how I did it, but I cannot imagine an analog world anymore. And I remember how difficult it was for me to understand the concept of digital. When I was a student, I had a course at university where I was told the idea behind bits and pixels. 15 years later, I taught students myself. This time, I was teaching them the concept of analog. Analog. Digital is simple. Analog is really complicated. Within 30 years, the reality that we live in has changed in a way that it is almost unrecognizable. Of course, this is not the first time that happened. Earlier generations must have had similar experiences. When cars were invented and changed how cities, how countries, how the whole planet looks like, sounds like, or when the steam engine changed almost everything. Those were times when reality changed dramatically as well. But there is a difference. It is the speed in which these changes happen. How long did it take from the steam engine being invented to the moment the steam engine had changed everything, everywhere, up to the smallest corners of the planet? Maybe 100 years? More than a lifetime. 1,000 years ago, 100 years did not change much. What parents taught their children was relevant information, useful to understand the world around. My father taught me a lot, but if I'm honest, just very little of what he told me is really helpful in the world I live in now. It took me a long time before I realized that the rules and the tricks that my father had learned during his lifetime were not helpful and oftentimes even obstructive to me. My father was a good man, but a lot of his wisdom turned out to be bad advice. One example, he told me, don't be lazy and go for the things that are easy for you. Show that you can master the things you are not good in. This advice that he gave me might have benefited him when he grew up in Germany after World War II. But it just made me waste a lot of time and energy before I learned that it is better to dump that piece of advice. 5,000 years ago, 1,000 years did not change much. If you fell asleep and woke up 1,000 years later, you would not know anyone anymore, but you would still be able to navigate the world. 500 years ago, if you fell asleep for 100 years, yes, there would have been new buildings, but the world would still function the way you knew. If you fell asleep 50 years ago and you woke up today, you might even recognize your friends that have turned old. You might even recognize some streets and some buildings. But most likely, you would not know anymore how to navigate the world. You would have to learn so much new. There are basically two concepts to understand the world. The first concept is based on the idea that there is one way to look at things, and this one way is the only true way. There is one right viewpoint from where you can see the truth, and this truth is the truth for everybody. I call this concept Monoperspective. The second concept is based on the idea that there are multiple ways to look at things, and all these views are meaningful. There is not only one true way. In that sense, that means that all views are true or better. Not to get confused with the word truth, all views are relevant to collectively form a better understanding for what is out there, for what is reality. Reality is what individuals agree on, what is shared between them. That means that the individual viewpoints have to constantly be exchanged and discussed to understand reality. I call this concept multiperspective. A lot of communication has to take place. It is necessary in order to agree on the shared reality. The better the communication, the more views can be considered to build the shared reality. The better the communication tools that are available, the more advanced the societies become. So there are two basic concepts to understand the world. There is monoview and there is multiview. But people are usually not one or the other. They're usually both to a certain degree. Very rarely people are on one extreme, either monoview or multiview. Most people are somewhere on a scale between one and the other, somewhere between -10 and +10 on the scale of perspective. There might be absolute monoperspective people, and maybe there are absolute multiperspective people, but they're just few. This curve visualizes the distribution of the people on the scale of perspective. So there are few really monoperspective people, even fewer multiperspective people, but the majority of humanity is clearly on the monoperspective side of the scale. Currently. There is a development. Over time, humanity always moved towards multiperspective. I don't exactly know where we are on the scale now, but I am confident to say that mankind is clearly headed towards multiperspective. And as I laid out before, the speed of the movement has accelerated noticeably. It has accelerated so much that we can notice the development even within one lifetime. Why is the speed accelerating? It has to do with the technical inventions in transportation and communication. Technological inventions brought people closer together, also physically. When I walk the streets in Berlin, I can see people from everywhere in the world. I have been living in Berlin for 25 years. 25 years ago, I have turned my head around if I heard someone speaking another language than German. This is not the case anymore. Every day now I hear English, Spanish, Turkish, Arabic, French, Swedish, Italian, Norwegian, Russian, Finnish, Chinese. And those are only languages that I'm able to recognize. There are many more tongues that I regularly hear on the street when I walk the 10-minute walk from my home to my studio. Of course, Berlin might be exceptional, but you can certainly recognize this trend at many places on our planet. Actually, there might be just few places left where you cannot recognize this trend. The decreasing proximity of people with different views and the increasing communication between people with different views simply makes it more likely that people exchange views and ideas. When I mention that, people often react critical. They say that when you turn on the TV or you read the news, you hear so much about fights and wars and people killing each other over different ideas. And that is true. Conflict is all over the news. I have described the reason why that is in another talk that you can find on YouTube. It's called The Way We Tell Stories. The whole talk in a nutshell. Conflict makes good stories. If things go bad, they get attention, not if things go well. So things get our attention that are an exception, to a point where people seem to be blind for normality. Normality is unspectacular, which doesn't make it a great story. But if you want to get an understanding for what is going on, you have to look at normality, not at the extreme. It is true. Sometimes the clash of views does happen, the war between views. When people who hold one view try to wipe out the people with a different view and eliminate them. But this happens less and less often. Between 1618 and 1648, there was the 30 Years' War in Central Europe, which started as a war over religion between the monoperspective views of two different branches of the same belief. Catholics and Protestants, both Christians, fought each other in a war that wiped out 30% of the population of that time. Catholics and Protestants did not agree on the right interpretation of the same story. For storytelling, you need tools. Storytelling tools. Words and language are the simplest storytelling tools. Words and language also need technology, but this technology is different from all the other technologies because it is built into humans already. It is the voice cord and the ears. All other storytelling tools need some kind of technology outside the human body. Different storytelling tools enable humans to tell stories in different ways. Those tools use technology that is outside the human body, technology to see and communicate different perspectives. Absolutely monoperspective individuals who are at -10 on the scale of perspective do not even need words and language. If I would be absolutely monoperspective, I would not want to talk and I would not want to listen. It would just be confusing for me. The world is what I can see with my own eyes. That's all I need to know. I don't want to listen to others. Their words might only confuse me. I might end up as a very lonesome animal, but that's okay if I don't care about others. A worm can be monoperspective. Humans are social animals, they like to talk. So this is how they start to exchange views and perspectives right away. Different media tools are especially suitable for storytelling within a certain range of the spectrum on the scale of perspectives. Painting was maybe the first media technology outside the human body that came up. The oldest known cave paintings are said to be more than 70,000 years old. Of course, it is very blunt to say how mono or multi-perspective folks at this time around were. Maybe they were super duper multi-perspective. Of course, no one can with reasonable certainty exclude the possibility of that. But stay with me for a minute and we will soon be much closer to a time where we have a much better understanding of the thinking of humanity. So painting was a technology suitable for communicating ideas and viewpoints on a certain spectrum on the scale of perspective. Then round about 70,000 years after those first known paintings were made, photography was invented. And then something happened that is typical when a new media technology comes up. The new technology changes the way the old technology is used and expands the spectrum of the older technology. So before photography was invented, painting was mainly used to depict the world. Then photography came around and was much better at that. So before photography was invented, painting was mainly used to depict the world in the most accurate way possible. Then photography came around and was much better at that. From that point on, painting, released from its main purpose to depict truth, could be used differently. Painting was liberated from its original job. Abstract painting was invented and widened the spectrum painting can cover on the scale of perspective. Let me place other media technologies on the scale of perspective. Okay, this is just a rough sketch. So with mankind in general moving towards multi-perspective view, it is necessary to have new tools of storytelling. Technology advances tools of storytelling. Korsakow, I think, is such an advanced storytelling tool. It is not yet a popular tool. The majority of people still like a less multi-perspective way of storytelling. The Korsakow way of storytelling at this point is still ahead of time for most. But for how long? Maybe 5 years, 10 years, 50 years? Hard to say. But even if Korsakow will not be part of popular culture for quite a while, the trend is clear. It is more than likely to be the same trend as throughout mankind, towards multi-perspective thinking. And as we have seen, the speed of the development is increasingly accelerating. I know in the time of Donald Trump it might not look like that, but clearly the majority of people who are most influential on how societies develop in the future are on the multi-perspective side of the scale. So if you want to communicate with the people that will form the future, pick your tools wisely. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. You can find more information on our website www.korsakow.tv. Music was by Jim Avignon and Ilya Pollach.